going to do testing in JavaScript. We're going to test in Node. We'll take those tests into the browser, and then we'll talk about how we can get those into a DevOps pipeline. Here's the part where I tell you, I am definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight. Have you heard that yet this week? Did it work? The cool part is this talk has no slides at all. It is just this notepad file. So that's really cool. But the other part is that I've got the code that we're going to build online right now up on this Git repository. So what's really cool about this is there's a start folder and a done folder. And so here's where we'll begin, and then here's where we'll end. So you can clone this repository, you can do similar experiments, and then when you get to your result, create a PR and tell me where I got it wrong. I would love to learn with you. The URL for this is github.com/I've already forgotten. And so let's head off to robrich.org, click on presentations here at the top, and here's JavaScript tests in Node, the browser, and CI. The link to GitHub is right here. While we're here on robrich.org, let's click on About Me and see some of the things that I've done recently. Here's some of the things that I've done recently. One of the things I'm particularly proud of is AZ Give Camp. AZ Give Camp brings volunteer developers together with charities to build free software. We start building software Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver that completed software to charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ Give Camp, or if you'd like a Give Camp here in Bangalore, then find me here at the event, hit me up on all the socials up here in the corner, and let's get a Give Camp in your neighborhood too. Some of the other things that I've done, Microsoft and Docker have given me some awards. I run a few user groups, and one of the things I got to work on is Gulp, the JavaScript build system. I did that in version 2 and version 3, so that was a lot of fun. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of, I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comments on the air, and they sent me a mug. Woo! So there's my trophy, my claim to fame. So let's dig into JavaScript. So I'll pull up this folder here, and I've got this, and we start talking about how quickly can I generate my first test? Time to first it. So let's pop open this, and we'll create a new file, hello world.js, and let's build a test. Should pass. We'll create a lambda, or we could create a function, and then we could say assert, hey, assert true and reason. Well, we do need to pull in assert, so let's pull in assert, import assert from assert, and we have our first test. Let's npm test, and hey, I just created a new test. Did I create it in the done folder? No such file or directory. Start package JSON. It's right here, silly. I am in the wrong directory. Oh, I know why. I need to get into the node folder. Okay, npm test. Time to first it. Here's our test, and it passed. Woohoo! Thanks for coming. No, I'm just kidding. Time to first it. That was really fast to be able to get to a single running test. We just did, kind of a few shortcuts, but we just created an assertion inside this method, and we described our test here with the it. So it, we can describe what our test is about, and then build this function that does the things that our test does. Now, in this case, this test was, well, a little anemic, a little simple. So let's start to test this. Now, here's our add function. I chose a function that was not super complex from business logic, but gives us enough of a taste to be able to play with it. So let's create a new file. I'll say test hello, nope, test add.js, and let's lose my mouse. Where did my mouse go? There it is. And let's do a little bit more. So I'm going to say it should add 2 and 2. And I'll build up my test here. Now I'm going to wrap it in a describe block. And that will be able to isolate tests of different types. So I can see that here's all the add tests, and here's all the remove multiply tests. So there we go. Now let's talk about the arrange, act, assert pattern. This will give us a little bit more structure within our code where we can say arrange, act, assert. Let's set up the conditions that make our test happen. Then let's do something. And then let's validate that those conditions happened. Now in this case, we're going to test drive the test a little bit. Let's start by creating the implementation. So I want to say const actual equals add x and y. Cool, that's what I want to do. Now I haven't pulled in all the things to be able to do it yet. So let's say import add from up one directory add.js. Excellent. Now that we've got our add function, what do we want to assert? Let's say expect actual to equal expected. Now, in this case, I'm using mocha with chai. We could also use jest or jasmine. With jest and jasmine, expect is built in and it's just available. But because I'm using chai as my assertion library, let's import that as well. Import chai from chai. And I could even, let's say then, const expect equals chai.expect. And if I wanted to get fancy, I could definitely destructure this and say, well, I want to just grab expect out of chai. If I wanted to get really fancy, I could modify my import statement as well. Cool. So now we've got this assertion library, this expect library, and it's going to compare our actual to our expected. Now, how is this different from our hello world test? Well, here with assert, we just had assert true. So let's fake this for a minute. We could say assert actual equals expected. Or we might use a different form where we say actual and expected. I was debugging this test where it kept saying I expected 7 and I got 5. And I debugged it and I'm like, okay, you expected 7, I debugged it, I got 7, it should work. It turned out I had actual and expected wrong. It should be this way. And so really, it should have been 5, but I got 7. And that's where I like this syntax a little bit better because it's obvious where expected and actual should go, and you don't make that simple mistake like I did. Cool. So we've done our implementation, we've done our assertion, and now we can set up the condition that creates that. Const x equals 2, const y equals 2, const expected equals 4. Cool. A test. Kind of. Now, the data that we chose works okay, but what if we went into our implementation and accidentally changed addition to multiplication? Our test would still pass. We've chosen poor data to be able to validate this assertion. So let's come in here and instead of adding 2 plus 2, let's add 2 plus 3. Let's create data that is unique enough to be able to validate the conditions that match our the thing that we want to test. Now, 2 times 3 is not going to be 5, it's going to be 6. Our test will fail, and we'll be able to capture that. Cool. NPM test. And we've got our passing test. Now we have that original one. Let's come back and put a describe block around that so that we can see it. Describe hello world. NPM test again. Yeah, I could turn on watch, but I'm lazy. Now we see in the hello world group, we've got one passing test. In the add group, we've got one passing test, two passing tests, success. Very nice. Now this is JavaScript, so we could not only add numbers, but we could also say add strings. Let's add A and B together. So now X is A, and Y is B, and expected is AB, and let's run our test again, and we've still got passing tests. Cool. JavaScript's wonderfully weird that way. So we were able to use this test to kind of validate our bound conditions, our unusual scenarios. Okay, so we've got add. Now I've got this subtract function here. So of course I'm going to go copy, new file, test, subtract, paste. Subtracting strings isn't going to work, so I will remove that. Let's hide, replace add with subtract, and pick new data. Let's subtract 5 and 3. So 5 minus 3 is 2. And of course, let's run npm test. And everything works. Nope, we got a fail. CB is not a function. What's this CB thing you're talking about? Hey, let's use this test to be able to discover how the system works. That's cool. I love that it says not only CB is not a function, but also the specific line number where that was the case. In this case, it's a smidge hard to see, but it's in subtract.js line 3. Cool. So let's come here into subtract.js. And, oh, hey, this is a callback function. We pass in 3 things. We pass in x, y, and a callback. And it's going to call back with our answer with an error or our answer. So, hey, let's modify this test to be asynchronous. So I'm going to take subtract here, and I'll pass in a function, error and actual. And let's set that there. And hey, let's actually expect error to be null. Now, we could definitely do that, but I actually like to say to equal null. I find that to be a little bit more descriptive, but either way works fine. Okay, so let's run our test, and now it passes. Very nice. But now what happens if, say, in our subtract method, we never call the callback? npm test, and it still passes. Uh-oh. Our code isn't behaving, but we didn't validate that because, well, our framework presumed that this was a synchronous test. We didn't tell it how this test ends. We just told it, hey, when you get to the bottom, consider that done. So yeah, it never did any of this part. It never ran any assertions. It succeeded. So let's take in a done parameter, and let's say right here, done. Now, because we've chosen to take in that parameter, if, for example, we don't call this callback again, and then we run npm test, then we will correctly fail. It's now waiting for that callback to happen, and it never did. We get a failure. Perfect. So let's go fix our code and npm test, and we get a success. Cool. We're able to do a synchronous test and an asynchronous test with callbacks. Let's see if we can do an asynchronous test with promises. Here's multiply, and multiply does some promisey stuff. We create a new promise. We pass in this resolve and reject function. In this case, we're only resolving. And so how might we write this test? Well, like any good developer, I'll start with add in this case. Nope, I'll start with subtract. And I will create a new file, test multiply.js. Replace subtract with multiply. And now I will multiply 5 and 3, so I expect that to be 15. But now instead of a callback, this is a promise. So I'm going to say dot then actual. And I've still got my done here so that I can tell it when it's done. And so now I'm multiplying 5 and 3, and we get another test passing. Did I not do that correctly? Multiply. Resolve x times y. I took in a done. I called a done. Yeah, that was unexpected. Let me go see what I did wrong. Yes, there is no error. I should have read the thing. It's trying to assert on a value that doesn't exist. Let's try that again. npm test. There we go. It's passing. So we did a dot then to wait for this promise to finish. I'm just going to put it on a new line so it's a little bit more discoverable. Now that's cool. We've got this test that is able to do promise-based content. And the cool part about this is we can also do promise-based content this way. So in this case, I'm going to multiply 2 and 3. So here's 2 and 3, and that will equal 6. But instead of calling dot then, I'm going to do async and await. Now, one of the interesting things that we can do is instead of taking in a then, we can return the promise. So it'll wait for that promise to resolve. If the promise resolves successfully, then the test will pass. If the promise does not resolve successfully, if it rejects, if it throws, then that test will fail. So npm test, done is still there. Thank you. Now we've got a passing test. Cool. So we were able to do promises in a really interesting way. Now let's also do async and await. That'll be fun. Let's go grab this test. And so now let's multiply 4 and 3. I don't know what they're building outside, but that's quite an adventure. 12. And so now I want to do async and await instead of promises. So instead of a dot then, I'm just going to say const actual equals await multiply. That means that I can get rid of this. And now because I've got an await here, I'll make this async. And because it's an async method, it will return a promise that Mocha just listens for, and it will resolve correctly. So let's run that test, and now that test passes too. Cool. We were able to use our test to test synchronous methods, to test asynchronous methods with callbacks, to test promises, and also to be able to test async and await. Cool. So let's now test divide. I'm going to start with add because, that works. And let's create a new file, test divide.js. Find and replace add with divide. And I know this one is synchronous, so that's going to work out well. Should divide 6 and 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. I don't want to divide strings, so I can remove that test. npm test. And I now have 8 passing tests. Cool. But divide does some interesting things if I divide by 0. So let's create another test that will validate dividing by 0. Let's come grab this part, and I'll say should divide 6 and 0. 6 and 0. What do I expect? Well, I expect an exception. Now, the cool part about expecting an exception is, well, I could say, expected error message. I want to say this is divide by 0 message. Or maybe in more modern versions of Node, it will give me an error code. So I will say expected error code 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cool. Now, I could wrap this whole test in it should throw or something like that. The downside to that is that that doesn't tell me if, say, for example, I did this. It's still throwing. My test is still going to pass, but that's not what I wanted to blow up. I wanted this to blow up. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this instead. Try, catch, actual equals error.code. So now I don't need this actual, but rather let's create a let actual, and that'll be undefined. And so now, if my test errors, it will hit this catch block, I'll get that error code, and I'll be able to continue. If it succeeds, actual will not get set, and my assertion will validate that it did not throw. And the other benefit is I've really nicely documented that I expect this to be a try-catch type of experience. It's obvious that this is an exception. I don't have to scroll back up here and go, wait, it should, what? I've very carefully described this try-catch there nicely. Okay, so npm test, and we've got now 9 tests. Uh-oh. Assertion error, expected undefined to equal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What happened here? Well, let me come back in here in VS Code. I will set a breakpoint right there. I will open a new terminal. I'll come in here and I will say I would like a Node debug terminal, please, JavaScript debug terminal. And I'm going to say in my JavaScript debug terminal, npm test. It starts up my thing. Oh, I'm not in the right directory. cd1, npm test. There we go. Now I'm in the right directory, and I hit my breakpoint. Let's go see what happened. F10, F11, F10. Oh! Somebody helped us. Here in this library, instead of throwing an exception, a divide by 0 exception with a particular code, they said, hey, math, I gotcha. I'll just return 0, that's right. No, that's not how this worked. Okay, so we just used a test to find a bug in our code. Const error equals new error. Can't divide by 0. And of course, my error.code is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to throw error. Cool. Now that I've corrected that bug in my code, I'm really glad I had that test for this. Let's run npm test again, and we'll see that that test hits our breakpoint, F10, F11. Yep, we've correctly gotten our exception. Let's throw it. We catch our code, and our test passes. Well, kind of. Our test timed out because it said it was only going to wait 2 seconds, and our debugging took longer than that. Yeah, we could definitely set our timeout by coming up here and saying this.timeout equals 5 seconds instead of 2 seconds. Now we do hit an interesting thing because we used an arrow function. It actually bound this, so we need to actually pass in a function, not that. But that's how we might choose to time out longer if we wanted more time. Or in this case, hey, we were just debugging. Of course it timed out. So let's exit out of here and come back to our thing, npm test. And now we have 9 passing tests. Cool. So we used our test to be able to validate our behavior. We used our test to be able to discover behavior. We used our test to be able to discover bugs and correct them. That's pretty cool. Our tests aren't just about proving the thing, but rather using it to be able to discover content that maybe we're less familiar with. Hey, I need to learn this code base. Let's write a test and see if this test proves true. One of the other things that we did really nicely with this test is we very specifically made this test code very simple so that we could document our system in the process of writing this test. We used our tests as documentation. Now, we could just as easily re-implement our thing in our tests or make them super complex with lots of mocks and stubs, and that would take away from this. We want to make our tests simpler than our implementation code to make sure that we can use our tests as documentation to clarify our intentions. That's cool. So we've got tests inside Node. Any questions so far on testing? Cool. Let's take what we learned from Node and apply it to a browser. Now, if we were in, say, a Webpack mechanism, maybe through React or Vue or Svelte, then that creates our tests inside of JS DOM, and so kind of we're testing inside of a browser, kind of, but not really. It's this fake DOM. I want to test an actual DOM. In this case, I don't have Webpack, so that'll be a little bit easier. But I've still here in my package, I've got chai and mocha, and I've got my functions here. I'm going to open this up in a command line. Let's get into 2, and let's do npm mocha init in the current folder. npx mocha init. Now the cool thing about mocha init is it's going to create a few files that we didn't have before. So we had our add and subtract and multiply and divide, but it just created this index.html that is a great thing for being able to run our tests. Now this web page, we can pop that open in a browser. That's not a browser. Here's a browser. And it will run all of our tests. In this case, we have no tests, so we have no failing tests. Let's go create some tests. So I'm just going to go copy all of these tests that we had before and set them in place inside of our browser folder right there. And now let's go reference them inside of our test, or inside of our index, rather. Now we do need to do, not that, that. We do need to do a little bit of touch up here because we did pull in mocha, but we also need to pull in chai since we use that script. src equals, it's in node modules. There we go. Let's also, we've set up our tests as BDD style tests. Excellent. Let's add.js and subtract and multiply and divide. Then let's also go add our applicable tests for those. Test add and test subtract and test multiply and test divide. And then, oh, we've got some other stuff. We'll come back to that. Cool. So let's reload this page. And of course, it does all kinds of blowing up. Console says, hey, you can't use import here. This is not an import thing. Okay, yeah, sorry. Let me open up my test and say, yeah, I know I just referenced chai directly, so I'm not going to import it. I also referenced add directly, so I'm not going to import that. So let's remove these imports from everywhere. Yeah, I could flip over to ES6 modules in the browser if I wanted to get really fancy. That would be cool. But in this case, I'll just say, hey, I just referenced all those script modules. And now if I do it, now, there we go. Cool. We've got all of our tests run here in this browser. And because we've got it running in a browser, we can now go test it and say, well, does it work in Safari? Does it work in Chrome? Does it work in Firefox? We can open up this page in each browser and go futz with it. In addition to that, let's take a look at just the subtract tests. Okay, looks like all the subtract tests passed. That's cool. Let's come into all the divide tests. Oh, ooh, we've got a failure there. It still tells us the exact line number, which I love. It's on line 37 inside of our test. But hey, we've got some JavaScript stuff going on here. So let's just come into our test divide and let's set a breakpoint, say right there. I'm going to refresh this page. And now we are debugging our test. F10, F11, F10, F10. Oh, ooh, we hit that same return 0 bug again. I'm glad that we had this test to be able to validate that our library wasn't behaving as expected. Let's come back into our divide.js and let's take a look at the solution that we came to last time. Fix that bug. Divide here. And let's come back into our test and refresh. And in this case, I'm just going to F10 real fast. And yep, it looks like that succeeded. I will remove my breakpoint and then close the tools. And yep, our test passed. Excellent. We can use that same debugging methodology that we used inside of Node, but here inside of Chrome to be inside of the browser to be able to debug our tests. Because, hey, they're running in a browser. That's awesome. So we got our tests into Node, and then we got our tests into a browser. So now we go to the DevOps guy and we say, hey, can you write a thing to load the page and make sure that the number on the top corner says 0 fails? And if it does say fails, can you like harvest the results and publish them in an interesting way? And the DevOps guy is like, no. There's no browser here in the CI system. No, just give me a command line and I'll run your command line, but that browser thing, I have no idea. Yeah, I get it. Opening a browser, especially inside of a headless build, is hard. Let me see what I can do. So let's take this build from the browser and see how we might run it in a CI pipeline. I'm going to come here now from folder 2 into folder 3, and let's take a look at Karma. Oh, before we do that, let's do this, because this will be really fun. I totally missed this demo. We've got this jQuery library that I want to do. So let's add a reference here to script src equals ajax lib.js. And we'll write a test ajax lib.js. Let's go create that in a second. And let's also pull in jQuery. And yeah, if you're still using jQuery, then shame on you and me. But mocking jQuery is hard, so let's go figure out how to do it. Here's our Ajax lib. And we've got this thing that is going to do $Ajax, and it's going to pass in this big configuration method, and we're now going to get this success and error thing, and it's like, how do I call that? How do I fake Ajax? Like, $Ajax is a thing that's built into jQuery. I need to, okay, let's go figure this out. New file, test Ajax lib.js. Okay, so describe Ajax lib. Okay, I want to do a happy path test because I'm feeling adventurous. It should call success. Okay, arrange, act, assert. Okay, I want to call my library. Let's take a look at our library. Let's put it over here. Okay, so I want to call get all records. I'm going to pass in an ID, and I'll get a callback. And that callback is going to contain the error and the data. So I think I probably need my asserts in here. That works. And that means that I need a done here and a done here. Cool. Now I want to assert that, well, let's say expect data to equal expected, expect error to equal null. Okay, everything's looking good so far. Well, now arrange. Well, I need an int ID that's, I don't know, 7. That's not really necessary, so I'm just going to say satisfy interface, data not important, but const data is important, so some object. Perhaps that's the data that it's going to return to me. That's important. Now, how do I fake out this $Ajax thing? Well, what if we said, hey, $.ajax equals some function that takes in an ID, takes in an object, and it's going to call object dot success returning data. Cool. So it's doing exactly what $Ajax is doing. It takes in this configuration object, finds some success method, and calls its success method with some data. Cool. Now, we do want to be a good net citizen. We want to fake out $.ajax, but now if you ran a subsequent test that tried to use Ajax for real, you would, well, get my stupid method instead. So let's say const real Ajax equals $.ajax, and then on after each, I'm going to put $.ajax back. Cool. Now I could definitely set $.ajax back on before each if I wanted to get really fancy, just to make sure that, hey, you know, if you really, really wanted to make sure that it was back to where it was, now we've got it back where it was. Cool. So we just faked jQuery. Another term for this is monkey patch. We just created a thing and assigned it into our library to be able to run this test. So let's come back to our test here, and expect is not defined. You are correct. Const expect equals chai.expect. That is not the browser. There's the browser. Should call success. Ooh, yes, I missed something there. What did I miss? I called it expected here, and I called it data here. Let's just call it expected. That'll make it a little easier. Thank you. Refresh. Oh, now I missed one. Oh, yes, this is data, and this is expected. Okay, that's better. Yeah, what's with this JavaScript thing? It's like really weird and finicky. Okay, now we've got a success. And if we wanted to watch it, let's open the Chrome Developer Tools and pull up test Ajax lib, just because that's super weird. Refresh, F10, we set up our mock, we go into our code. Now we're using the fake jQuery, so instead of calling into jQuery itself, we call into our mock function, which has that just fake, let's go call success on it. So let's step into that. We're back in our code, now in our success method. We could do this to test our error method as well. And then we're back here, and our test passes. I'm going to remove this breakpoint, refresh. Cool. Mocking wacky libraries. Make sure you set them back when you're done. Cool. Okay, now let's do this inside of CI. Now our goal is to make a command line to be able to launch these tests inside of a browser. We could just succumb to saying, okay, fine, they're only in Node, we'll just use JS DOM, but we could also say, yeah, I kind of do want to run them in the browser. So let's say karma npx karma init. Now, the cool thing about NPX Karma is it will interview us next and say, what's your testing framework? I'm using Mocha. Do you want to use required? No. Do you want to capture any browsers automatically? Yes, let's grab Chrome. I could also grab Firefox. In this case, I'm not. What is the location of your source files? star.js. Are there any files that you want to ignore? Nah. Do you want to Karma to watch all the files? Yes, please. And it generates this config file, which is really cool. Let's pop open this config file that it just generated for us. Karma config, and we can take a look through Karma config. Now we do need to pull in both Mocha and Chai so that we have that Chai library available. But we can then look through here and we can see the include and exclude lists. We can do various reporters. In this case, it's just looking at progress. Adding Nyan Cat here is really entertaining. I like that. We could also talk about the various browsers we want to grab, Chrome. I have auto watch on, so it'll automatically rerun my tests anytime my code changes. That's perfect. And single run is false, so it'll just keep running in a browser to do all of the things. Okay, so now that we've got Karma in place, let's also go grab all of our test files from here. Let's also go grab our test Ajax. Cool. And because Karma will just automatically discover all of our things, now we can just say Karma start, our NPX, Karma start, and now Karma will kick off and do all of our tests. Now it's going to launch this browser on our primary monitor right here. And the cool and annoying thing is if we close it, Karma says, hey, wait, you closed the browser. Here, let me start it again. Yes, fine. Okay, notice though that it's not the browser that I had open previously. It's a new browser with its own profile, its own sessions, so that I don't get bleed in from plugins that I might have installed on my profile or autocomplete data that I might. It is testing in a neutral environment. That's excellent. And it ran all my tests. I've got 8 successful tests and 1 failed test. What is that failure? Well, I'm apparently dividing by 6 and 0, and it failed because I didn't get that thing. Well, let's take a look at our divide code. That guy who wrote that divide function, let's go fix that bug. Okay, divide. And now it reruns our tests and we get a success. Cool. Now I'm going to stop this and come into my Karma config, and I'm going to grab Chrome and Firefox. Now let's run Karma again. And now we'll launch Chrome, we'll launch Firefox, and now we have 18 passing tests. If you get paid per test, you run them in both browsers, now you have twice as many tests. Now we have 200% code coverage. But the cool thing is we are here inside of a browser. So much like we did with Mocha in the browser, we can just pop this open and take a look at the files and go dig into the file and set a breakpoint there. I find that to be a little bit easier to pop open debug, where now we have a specific thing to that test, and now we can take a look at the files that we want to do. So here's my test divide. I can set a breakpoint right there. I can rerun this, and now it hits that spot, and it says, hey, I can, F10 and F11. If you're debugging inside of the main tab, the console may say, hey, that browser's unresponsive. Let me kill it and start over. Where if you're in a special debug page, it won't. So I'll push go, and I was able to debug my test. I find the Mocha runner to be a little bit easier to debug. So I'll usually have the Mocha page and the Karma page, and then I'll be able to do interesting things. So let's close both these browsers. And now how do we run this from a DevOps build? Well, we did Karma start, our npx Karma start, and it kicked up the thing, and it watched the pages. And so let's modify this to say --single run. Now it will run only once. It'll do the thing, it'll fire up the browsers, it will close the browsers, and we got all the passing tests. Or we could take that a step farther, and here's my package.json that does so. Let's specify the browsers as headless. So I've got Chrome headless and I've got Firefox headless. Yes, I know it's running on a CI server that doesn't have a monitor attached, but I've launched Chrome in headless mode. It's still doing all the browsery stuff. It's just not trying to pop up a window. So npm test, and it kicks up Karma. It's running all of my unit tests, not integration tests. This isn't Cypress. It's running all my unit tests in both of those browsers, harvesting the results. That's cool. So I go back to my DevOps guy and I go, hey, can you run npm test? Yeah, that was easy. Selling that one is really easy because he's probably already got npm test in the build anyway, because, well, I wanted to run my unit tests. I just modified my package JSON, and now I'm able to run my unit tests in each of those browsers as well. We started with the start folder that had no tests at all, and we built up to the done folder. The URL, the URL for this repo is github.com/robrich/JavaScript testing presentation, or you can head off to robrich.org and click straight there to get here. We were able to test in the browser, test in DevOps pipeline, and test inside Node. We were able to use our tests to be able to test synchronous, asynchronous with callback, asynchronous with promises, and async and await. We were able to use our tests to be able to validate our functionality, to be able to document our functionality, and to be able to discover our functionality, even finding that bug in a couple of different places. And in each of those spots, we could set up debuggers to be able to step through our tests when we found a failure. This was really fun to get to show you this. I look forward to your comments in the PRs. Thanks for coming.